Commissioner Lund, did you have a question for us?
No, I'm just picking up the audio right now. So that was my question. I hear you right now.
All right. Ready? Yes, sir. Good evening. The February 23rd, 2023 Whatcom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. I'll call the roll. Please let me know if you're here. Kelvin Barton, that's me. I'm here. Daniel Dahlquist,
I'm here.
Atul Desmani. Joel Desmani. Jim Hansen,
Here.
Stephen Jackson. Stephen Jackson. Julie Jefferson. Julie Jefferson. Kim Lund.
Here.
Dominic Masseri.
Here.
Scott Van Dalen.
Here. Oh, good.
Okay, thank you. Atul Desmani. Atul Desmani, we're just calling roll and see that you arrived.
Sorry, yeah, I had trouble
All right.
connecting.
Thank you, Commissioner Desmani. Right, please join me in the flag salute. Here, we'll wait for the flag to come up on the screen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is time for department update. Assistant Planning Director Steve Roberts, would you give us the department update, please?
You bet. I don't have much for you tonight. We're going to talk about wind energy. We have some experts with us to help out. And we anticipate that we'll also be talking about this at our next meeting also.
So now is time for open session for public comment.
Sure. So, well, welcome to the meeting.
Oh, she's with you guys too?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
The meeting is being broadcast live. The audio is being recorded and will be posted to the county website. As noted on our website, members of the public may watch the meeting or join online or by phone. During the open public comment session, speakers may not speak to items that are scheduled on the agenda for public hearing tonight. So that would be the wind energy system code amendments. So we do have public present. If you would like to provide public comment at this time, we'll take comments from anyone in the room first. And you would come up to the podium and put your name on the sign-up sheet. Would either of you like to do public comment now, or do you want to wait till later for the public hearing as part of wind energy?
They'll be part of the
And
presentation.
you'll be part of the
Everyone's
presentation as
here,
well, so,
Everybody,
okay.
there's nobody.
And-
Not here for this.
okay. So we're good. So nobody, does anyone online want to speak now to something other than the wind energy, which will be later? If you would like to, please raise your hand. Okay, no hands are raised, so no public comment at this time.
Now is the time for commissioner comments. Commissioners, any comments? Commissioner Desmani.
I would like the official record to indicate Commissioner Deshmani said, woo-hoo! Those of you know that this subject of wind energy is something that, what was it, Calvin, 5 years ago? We got on our list of things that we'd like to talk more about. Was it 5 years ago?
Yeah, it was put on the docket in 2018, so commission may have been talking about it even before then.
Yeah, I think it was a year or two before that, yeah. So, just I'm happy about that. Thanks.
Any other commissioners have comments? All right, then let's move along. Approval of minutes for the February 9th meeting.
I'll move to approve.
Motion to approve.
I can second.
Okay, we have a second. Thank you, Commissioner Van Dalen. Are there any corrections or additions? Okay, seeing that there are no corrections or additions, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, Commissioner Lund,
Approve.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlquist,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
It is 7 yeses, that carries.
So now is the time for tonight's topic, wind energy. Liz Sprong, I believe you're doing the presentation.
I will start it out.
Thank you.
All right, so as you mentioned, we're talking about some proposed amendments to Whatcom County Code Chapter 2014, which is the wind energy system section. This is, as I mentioned, this was put on the docket back in 2018, evidently at the urging of the Planning Commission, as I didn't recall. And the council directed us to review and if needed, revise the wind energy system regulations. And doing this was assigned to the Climate Impact Advisory Committee, of which we have a few members here tonight. I think Ellen was online. Did I see her name up there? Chris is the coordinator for the committee. Eddie Uri worked on these as well as part of the committee, and then they enlisted the help of Mia Devine, who is from Spark Northwest. I myself was not part of creating these, although after they did their work and brought them to me, I kind of made sure that they all fit within the code properly and language, you know, copacetic. So I don't know that much about wind energy. That's why these fine folks are here to try to answer questions or fill you in on that kind of stuff. I did outline, well, I provided you in the memo, at least some descriptions and pictures of what the different types of systems are. And, you know, there's kind of 3 levels of them: meteorological towers, small wind energy systems, and the larger wind energy systems. And I'm sure the folks in the CF will talk about those a little bit more, because a lot of the changes in the policies have to do with each of those different things and trying to promote more wind energy, make it easier for people to do this kind of stuff. One thing that I did do that I want to mention, though, is, and some of the commissioners have been here longer will know that as I've been going through various code amendments, I'm trying to take all the definitions out of each individual chapter. And because we have them in multiple places and they read differently in some cases, so I'm taking them out of the individual chapters, putting them all in one place, one definitions chapter. And in doing that with this, I finally came to the point where all of our definitions actually have numbers for some reason. And I can't fit any more in there because some of them are like 20.92.6.5.4. So I'm proposing that we just get rid of all those numbers so that and just alphabetize them. So that's just kind of a housekeeping thing. That's all I really need to say, but I wanted to turn it over to the CIAC folks to kind of explain what they're proposing.
And I might just kick it off. So my name is Chris Elder. I'm a senior planner in watershed management for Whatcom County Public Works, and I was first assigned, or I think I actually volunteered to staff the Climate Impact Advisory Committee back when council created it in 2017. And as Commissioner Deschmonte mentioned, relatively quickly, it was kind of directed to the Climate Committee to start working on some potential wind energy code revisions.
Among a lot of other work they were doing.
Among a lot, yeah, it's a tall order. So just, some brief background. We've actually had two separate subcommittees formed to try to tackle this. Initially, back when Alex Rammel was on the committee, he kind of led an initial look at trying to review what was the current state of our wind energy code, what were some potential improvement areas. We did kind of a pretty significant amount of research at that point, trying to find out what other counties had done with regards to their wind energy code, and make sure that what we have currently was consistent with that. Ultimately, after Alex was elected to the state, actually at that point, Commissioner Deschmonte was on that subcommittee for a minute as well. So to provide some input there. We had a little bit of a lull, probably about a year off without any activity. And then once Eddie Uri joined the committee and a couple other interested committee members kind of picked it back up, found out where we left off with Representative Rammel, and kind of in the support of Media Divine, had some other consultant, John Bosch, who's a wind energy consultant, provided some input on the subcommittee as well. Actually, we had Simon Vickery from Resources participated for a moment as well. So there's been a lot of eyes on it. So I think what you see today is the result of ultimately two separate subcommittees coming together and spending a fair bit of time trying to bring us at least before us. And I think, let's say you got one hand up, and I predict Eddie wanted to say a few words before we get into some of the other details there. That's one's hand up.
Eddie Uri, would you have your hand up? Would you like to add to that?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so my name is Eddie Uri. I've been a resident of Whatcom County, Bellingham for over 12 years. I am a member of the Whatcom County Climate Impact Advisory Committee. Reporting on behalf of the committee and the subgroup, just to help give you a little more background and context before we dive into the technical details of this. So the last time the code, standing Whatcom County code governing development of wind energy resources, it's been over a decade since that was updated. There was two times, 2008 to 2012. In the decade since, wind energy technology, the economics have grown, transformed drastically. The cost of electricity generated by wind has been more than cut in half, continues to decline. The efficiency and output of wind energy generation more than doubled, continues to grow. The proliferation of wind energy across the world and in the United States, particularly in the Midwest and Texas, but also in Washington State, in the Columbia Gorge area, and other parts you've seen, substantial development. Other counties in Washington, Kittitas, Klickitat, Adams, Thurston have gone through significant processes, developing utility scale wind energy, and have updated their code in accordance. Whatcom County's code is just, in simple, it's outdated, is due for an update. You might say overdue. Perhaps this definitely hasn't been the most urgent matter to attend to. We're all glad that we're getting around to it, given Whatcom County has a moderate wind resource, isn't first at top of the list for development from utilities, but as we're transitioning to reach a 100% renewable energy generated electric utility system statewide in Washington as mandated by state law, that means in order to ensure smooth reliability, there's going to need to be wind, as well as other solar, other resources, but particularly wind generated even in the more moderate resource areas, of which parts of Whatcom County are comparable at a comparable level to other places in Washington that have had utility scale wind developed. So that's known. Another problem we're seeking to address with this was just for the property owner in a rural area that wants to install just a small scale wind turbine to meet their own energy needs, as it stands, has to go through quite a lot of red tape and bureaucratic process, and is vulnerable to appeals and all sorts of just hassles and added expenses in order to install what it should be like a fairly simple, modest mechanism on their property with very minimal impact. So we wanted to open it up and make it easier for folks, farmers, rural residents, or anywhere appropriately located to be able to develop on their property, having the rules and standards more clearly outlined and lower the cost and burden on that. So we're proposing to differentiate between small wind energy systems and wind energy systems to make it simple. Two categories: a small scale one to have it not to be outright permitted, and a larger scale, which is still a pretty low threshold, 100 kilowatt, to then be to go through a standard process in administrative permit in designated areas and conditional use permit in others. And we at the same time upheld the importance of making sure we maintain, the right standards of regulation and conditions to protect public health and safety and welfare, and particularly wildlife impacts and other environmental impacts, but particularly to birds, and bats, avian species. Though we do believe that the State Environmental Policy Act, the SEPA process as it stands, and other laws, that stand alongside Whatcom County Code are also sufficient to protect environmental and habitat and wildlife interests in the face of any wind development. Also, it's possible that larger scale wind energy, utility scale wind energy, if it is developed in Whatcom County, could go through the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council review process. But if it does go through Whatcom County Code, this is our proposal for a better form to fit. And we don't think, we're not, the committee, we're not saying that this is perfect, and we certainly hope to see or open to seeing improvements made from through this open public process, given more stakeholder input forthcoming here. And this is our draft, this is our suggestion. And I know it's a lot of technical stuff. Our Mia Devine is here with far more expertise and experience in wind energy than I, that can answer some of the more technical questions that you may have, or justify some of the choices we made. But when it comes down to it, that's it. I mean, we're I guess, Cliff, did you want me to also walk through a summary of it, or we know we have the materials in the packet here, but it's a lot to go through. So how's best to go about that?
That's up to you and the committee and what the commission needs.
And Eddie, can you pause just for a moment? Just needed to, for the record, Commissioner Jefferson joined the meeting several minutes ago. But we needed to get that on the record so that it's easy for our planning commission coordinator to pick that up. Thank you. Go ahead, Eddie.
Well, I guess at this point, I'll defer back to the commission as far as any questions you might have or how you'd like to proceed.
Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, thank you for your work on this, Eddie. And I want to give special thanks to all the great work of the Climate Committee on this issue and many other issues. And I would like to encourage you to stay engaged with the Planning Commission through the comprehensive plan update, because we know that ways to generate more clean energy are just a tip of the iceberg on all the things that need to be done in terms of protecting against deforestation, restoring floodplains, construction resilience, to adapt to changing climate. There's so many things. And I would like to strongly encourage your group to really stay engaged, because you have so much expertise and you've done so much work, and your findings have been incorporated into the resolution from council, directing us to use them in our comp plan update. So I just hope that you will stay with us, your group will stay with us and go through this chapter by chapter and help us make the amendments that need to be done.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. And yes, absolutely. Yeah, very much my intention to continue through this process with you all.
Cliff, would you like to take us through this, or is that if you took us through it?
Is that the request that we just go through line item by line item?
Yes, we should.
Proposed change? Okay.
I'll put the code up on the
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Do we have Mia here also remotely?
He is here in the room.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't know if you also wanted to introduce yourself before we dive in.
Go ahead.
Yep, okay. Mia Devine, I work for Spark Northwest, which is a nonprofit based in Seattle, and provide clean energy technical assistance. And my background, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and specializing in wind energy. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years now in various capacities, including working for an engineering consulting firm that worked on utility scale wind projects. And my role now at Spark Northwest is working on more smaller scale wind farms and businesses and homes with me. I also have been living in Whatcom County for almost 10 years now in Everson, and we installed a small wind turbine on our farm property a couple of years ago, 10 kilowatt system. So I've gone through the existing permitting process myself. And yeah, as far as the code, as part of my work too, a number of years back, I worked on a project funded by the Department of Energy to basically look at wind energy codes across the country and come up with best practices. And we wrote up a whole document, recommendations for counties across the US. And so a lot of that language ended up in this recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Kim.
So the issue is, Tammy did advertise a public hearing on this for tonight, but it wasn't listed as such on the agenda. For yourself, they're just talking about it. We think we should, the chair, you should amend the agenda to include that, but we'll also advertise in the whole public hearing.
So we're going to do two of them.
It was advertised online as well, and it was on the agenda online.
Oh, just not.
On the web page, just not on, it's not on this version. And not on the one in the agenda center, but on the page of the planning commission.
Excuse me, I'd like to make a point of not really order, but of technology. People who are in the room live come across as very faint on our speakers. And if we turn it up too far, the people who are remote will be way too loud. So I'd encourage people who are there live to speak strongly and clearly, because I'm having trouble understanding what you're saying, and I'm probably not the only one.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. So what was being said is a staff comment with our assistant planning director. We have it on the county website, and it's been published that we are to have a public hearing tonight, but it did not make it onto our agenda that the commissioners got. And so I'm amending the agenda for tonight to add a public hearing. And quite likely, we may have a public hearing next meeting also. But so we'll have a public hearing tonight. And that was what the discussion was about. The staff just realized that it was everywhere but in our minutes or in our agenda. So that's what it is. And we'll do our best here, Commissioner Hanson. So Cliff, go ahead.
Well, I just putting this up for Chris to start talking. Sure. I don't want. All right, well, this part was me getting rid of the definitions, and they're further on down. I added them to 97. There were already a couple in there that were the same, but amended them to meet what the committee had come up with. Let's see, this was me as well. Applicability. I hate when the code just says after the effective date of ordinance codified in this chapter, because then you gotta go look it up. If you're an applicant or something, find out when that date is. So I just put the date in there that happened. This was the table in the current code that lays out what kind of permit you need, what zone it is and everything. The committee has made a couple of changes to the what the rated output is for a small energy system versus a wind energy system. I've reorganized that thing. You'll see also that they are proposing to allow the wind energy systems, the larger ones, in a few more zones. Currently, it's only in the heavy impact industrial. So allowing it with an administrative permit in the heavy impact industrial, light impact industrial, and then the ag, rural forestry, and commercial forestry with conditional use permit. And then the meteorological towers and the SWES, which are kind of the individual homeowners system they might want to put in, allowed in all districts. It's a permitted use if it's less than 200 square feet. So Chris, or you guys might want to talk about your changes to these things there. In terms of zone.
Hold just for a minute, Cliff.
Yep.
And I probably should have said this, Chris, anytime that this is a great time to step in. This is kind of Cliff did all the rearranging, and so he explains that to us, but you and your committee worked on all the changes that are on here that are not part of this.
Yeah, no, we'll share ourselves, don't worry.
Okay.
So I guess just two overarching comments or considerations as we go through this. As Mia kind of mentioned, she's done an enormous amount of research nationwide of what are national standards around wind energy systems. So a lot of the changes you see are just trying to bring Whatcom County standards up to what the national standards match. So what she has to do for projects anywhere around the state. The other kind of consideration to some of the changes is trying to bring in our wind energy system code requirements with some of our other code requirements. You know, the noise one was one that came up where we have a different noise requirement for wind than we do for high impact industrial operations. So trying to bring consistency with what the wind energy code is to other permitted uses that we have. So when I give that holistic framing, a lot of the changes you see are going to largely hit on those two buckets. So for the meteorological towers, as Cliff kind of said, that I think previously was applied to all districts and kind of proposed to keep that as such. The small wind energy, again, with some of the additional considerations you'll see further down in the code, just kind of wanted to make that available to property owners across the county. The more significant changes is probably in the wind energy system, where we've also allowed for wind energy systems to be permitted in both agriculture, forestry, both forestry zones. Part of the economic wind analysis that we had presented by another wind consultant, John Bosch, demonstrated that some of the most economically significant areas for wind energy in Whatcom County are kind of where, Cherry Point along our coastal shorelines, and then also kind of right along the foothills of Sumas and Stewart Mountain. There's some of the most significant kind of economical wind energy areas. So I wanted to make those forestry zones available for development of wind energy and give it that conditional use permit consideration, which is a higher level of review to consider. The ag was also included. One of the recommendations in the climate action plan was not only to preserve agricultural lands, but also allow farmers to explore other kind of renewable energy ways to generate some income. So whether or not that was the same kind of high economic opportunity that some of those forestry or coastal areas might provide, wanted to make that again an option for farmers to generate some additional revenue, which will hopefully have an additional benefit of preserving that agricultural land. I'll hold as it looks like there's a question.
Commissioner Lund.
I just had a question about the small wind energy systems of 50 kilowatts or less, those residential type. And why they weren't included in this table here.
So they are included, that's just the acronym SWES, so small wind energy system versus just the WES is the larger wind energy systems.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard you say in your comments just now that that was being handled differently in the code later on. So I thought this was the one that was slightly higher, up to 500, greater than 50 to 500 was, sorry, I might have misunderstood. I'm having the same problem that Jim Hansen mentioned, where it's a little bit quiet on the comments in the room tonight on the audio. Thank you for clarifying, though.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I think I was more just saying with the small wind energy, there are some additional code modifications a little further down beyond just the zoning table that will clarify a little bit in more detail why we're recommending allowing that in all districts, because there are other code requirements that prevent any potential impacts to neighbors. Are there any other questions related to the zoning or the allowed zoning?
We have one. Commissioner Desmonte, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify that, based on Commissioner Lund's comments, I just want to make the clarification that small now means in these amendments up to 100, not up to 50.
And that was one of the proposed changes, and that was to bring up our small wind energy system code with a national standard. It's my understanding that small wind energy systems are typically up to that 100 kilowatt. So that was just bringing us to a consistency with national standards.
Chris, go ahead.
Just go ahead and scroll down to the next change.
So these are some of the changes you proposed. So this was, to try to blend it into surrounding uses, even though they're 200 feet tall or something.
Yeah, Mia actually had a pretty good justification for this one. If you want to tackle that, if you recall.
Yeah, I think this was related to, trying to, blend in and hide the wind turbine when it is such a big structure. That might actually, if you're planting, trees or other things that actually would inhibit the wind resource and kind of defeat the purpose then of, capturing the wind. And then it just was kind of, I think there was some language in here, to the extent reasonably possible, was just kind of seems subjective and hard to actually say what's reasonable. So I just wanted to make things, well, I guess just eliminate that kind of subjective.
Make sure your voice stays high. For these folks. Okay. This is one I took out because violation of this chapter is always violation of our code, so we don't really need it. And then the next part is the setback requirements. The green text is what was brought up from another section earlier. Let's get rid of that. But the changes in here are going from, and there's that you see that this is all west now. This is west. So from going from 1.2 times total height to 1 and 1,000 feet instead of 1,300. Okay.
I think there's a typo here.
Could be.
I think the first row is supposed to be SWES and the second row is the larger wind energy system.
Oh, you're right. Let me.
While you're working on that, Commissioner Lund, is the volume coming through okay? Commissioner Hansen? Either of you? I see a thumbs up.
Yes, it's starting to sound better. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, commissioners.
And then click maybe in the under setback requirement. I don't know if it needs to have a slash there for the SWES. In that top row, 1 times total height of,
Oh, it wasn't supposed to be for both.
right, just the
Okay.
small.
Okay.
So the justification for removing the 0.2, ultimately, if we have a small wind energy system, the setback requirement should be equal to the total height of that tower. The 0.2 addition didn't have any reasonable justification and does again align with what national standards are for setbacks for small wind energy systems. The large, or the regular wind energy system setback, reducing that from 1320 to 1000 feet. Again, that was in the similar vein of, it seemed like there was an undue burden placed on the setback, given that the wind energy tower is not going to exceed that 1000 feet height. And I actually think that they were not expecting them to exceed a 500-foot height unless they trigger the FAA regulations. Is that correct?
200 would trigger it, but yeah, they could be 500 feet. Yeah.
So again, part of the overarching challenge again was trying to recognize where the current code appeared to place an undue burden on permitting requirements for wind energy systems compared to other uses. So again, this is trying to bring things more in alignment with national standards. That covers that one.
Okay. Setbacks from electrical lines and communication lines, again, for the same reason, going from 1.2 to 1 times. Nothing there. This is the green text that was moved up top. And then this is something you guys added.
Right, so there was some discussion, certainly someone brought up the potential impact of ice throw from splitting blades. So there was a recognition that if there was any structures located within that 1000-foot threshold, that an additional analysis should be completed to determine whether or not ice throw was of significant concern. So again, this is one additional step the committee made to try to recommend, just put some of those safety measures in place to ensure that there were no unintended consequences of these recommendations.
Okay. On height limitations, eliminating the height limit for the wind energy systems, the larger ones, and for the Met towers. And then SWES raising it from 100 to 200.
Maybe you can probably speak better to this than I can.
Yeah, and I guess the reason here was, the taller the tower, the more wind it can collect, the more economically viable the project will be. And so any limitation on the height should strictly be for safety purposes. And FAA comes into play as soon as you go above 200 feet. And that's the main safety concern is, airplanes. So, yeah, we just said small wind energy, as long as it's less than 200 feet, it's fine. And then larger wind energy systems usually are taller than 200 feet. So they'll go through the conditional use permit and they'll have to go through FAA. But other than that, there's no other reason to put a height limit from the county perspective.
How tall are they typically, the West?
They could be 500 feet-ish. I always think in meters, so it's hard to convert to feet, but at least, yeah, 500 feet.
Okay, any questions on those? Oh, Jules.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Amir, when we're talking about the height, are we talking about the tip of the blade sticking straight up, or are we talking about the top of the tower?
I think we'd have to go back up to the definitions, but I believe we said the maximum tip height of the blade. But in any case, there's no height limit anyway, so I don't think that matters too much.
Great, thanks.
All right, and here you guys have made some changes to the sound levels.
Yeah, so this was kind of what I referred to in my opening remarks, where there was a higher threshold sound limit applied to wind energy systems than we applied to sound limits in the high impact industrial zone, for example. So this just simplifies it to say that during normal operation, the wind energy system shall comply with the sound requirements of that zoning district. So again, just trying to bring this to be consistent with other proposed development uses in that zone.
Not louder.
Oh, sorry. So beyond that, just trying to build that consistency. So this sound requirement one is just trying to connect it back to the zone that the proposed development is in and not put that undue burden on the wind energy system over other uses.
So this noise complaint part was actually moved from another section. For some reason it didn't show up as green like the other one. But this, I think you guys added. Number 2.
Commissioner Jefferson. Go ahead, Commissioner Jefferson. Need to unmute.
Sorry about that. I was waiting for something to be restated because I jumped on late and missed, what was the green above? What is the meaning of the green text?
So when you move text in Word, it turns it green sometimes, but not always.
Okay, so it was just that it was relocated to a different area?
This text here just got moved up to here.
Okay, my apologies, but thank you for the clarification.
For some reason in moving the noise complaints, it did.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing, and then somebody saying green again. I'm like, well, what does it mean? Okay, thank you.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with that number 2 there, providing a report from a qualified independent acoustical consultant, again, is just to demonstrate, what the actual noise impact is of that proposed wind energy system. And again, helps not only help clarify what that development proposal will impact, and also helps demonstrate for any future noise complaints, that the developer has in fact done their work to ensure that it does not exceed the zoning threshold as stated. So again, part of this is to give the county a higher degree of confidence that what we're permitting is in fact in compliance with the code and kind of meets industry standards, and also provide some additional protection to the wind energy developer or homeowner as they build their project.
And Chris, can you hold just for a moment? Eddie, Yuri, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah, if I thought I just might speak a little bit to this because, recognizing it could be a point of concern. Obviously, noise impacts to neighboring residents living, less than a mile from these facilities or such, there might be some concerns there. But to put it, just to be clear in perspective, the noise levels generated by these systems that we'd be dealing with they're certainly not greater, in proportion of sound to distance than, say, ocean waves for those that live near the shoreline, or those that live in the same distance from arterial roadways, or definitely, not compared to I-5, and certainly far, far less than, the railways that run through Whatcom County. So this is not like, we thought it best essentially to, fair and appropriate to have, if there are noise level limits set for a certain area for whatever reason, then the systems here would have to conform to that standard. But to single out wind energy systems with a lower threshold for sound, as was done in alternate versions or previous versions, this is just what we thought was best. And then still recognizing that we need to have a process for, say, if because of malfunction or for whatever reason, there is a nuisance or there is an impact to neighbors, that there's an appropriate way for them to file a complaint and a fair way to have that resolved. So this is our suggestion, but we're open to other alternate ways to do it. But that's what our thinking was.
Go ahead, Chris.
Let's see. Yeah, so add a couple words here and there. I don't know if that matters that much.
Minor safety improvement, again, just trying to tackle the other public safety components.
And then the blade tip clearance. So these 2 crossed out lines here really are in the definition. So I think we thought we just didn't need to repeat them. Wildlife protection, here's a big change. And Chris, I think you worked on this one. So.
Yeah, well, I think honestly, this was one of the main sticking items that kind of put that first subcommittee on hold that I referenced. We recognized that wildlife was going to be a high priority for Whatcom County, especially. Ultimately, what the committee did was we reached out to the Wildlife Advisory Committee for their input. Greg Green, who previously served as the chair of the Wildlife Advisory Committee and has also been a consultant who's developed multiple reports for development of wind energy systems, met with myself, and I believe Eddie and a couple other committee members to try to draft up some recommended guidance for how we could strengthen our wildlife protection section for wind energy systems. So ultimately, you see there number 1 are some of the recommended guidance that Mr. Green provided to us. So we tried to accommodate his language. He also provided other recommendations that other counties in Washington state had included in their code as well. So I'm not going to run through all that necessarily, but ultimately tries to match up our county standards and refer back to both the state as well as the federal wind pattern guidelines, especially focused on migratory birds, raptors, and bats.
Commissioner Masseri.
Had a quick question on number 3 there under D, where it mentions removing carcasses of livestock, big game within a mile of the project. How is that going to be dealt with? You know, because within a mile, you're going to be on other people's properties. So there's that concern. And then it seems like a bold task to comb 100-mile radius or a mile radius around it, assuming you'll actually get them all. I want to see what that would look like.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. I mean, ultimately, you know, considering, or I guess, you know, part of the thought process probably with that 1 mile radius is given that the majority of potential future wind energy system developments, I think we would imagine would be in those high economic areas, which are going to be Cherry Point or kind of the foothills in Essex or Mountain, which is largely commercial forest. So ultimately, we weren't expecting that livestock carcass was going to be a high concern for development in these areas. And if it is on commercial forest land, for example, likely going to be one of the larger forest landowners that would likely have ownership of the surrounding land. Just make that a requirement if hunters are on site and ultimately end up killing the game species. They remove that carcass within a certain period of time. But ultimately, the goal of this is just to reduce any additional raptors that might try to occupy the area or have a mortality event with the wind energy system. I do see your point as far as monitoring and enforcement of that potential provision. I don't know, Mia, if you have any experience working with projects that have that requirement.
Yeah, and actually, this is kind of my first time reading this language too. And I would tend to agree 1 mile is kind of excessive. And so I think if the goal is to protect, you know, raptors who might be, you know, swooping down to get a carcass, the main concern is we don't want them to be swooping around the wind turbines and get hit by a blade. So it seems like as long as you're monitoring, you know, 1,000 feet at the most around each base, that would be sufficient. But I don't have that much experience working with the environmental folks on wind projects to know, yeah, is 1,000 feet right or is a mile
And I predict,
required?
yeah, I predict some of this language, as I referenced, was pulled from what other counties in Washington state have. And if you look at a lot of the wind energy systems developed in the Columbia Gorge, for example, a lot of that is open range land. It's going to be a single rancher, so managing livestock in that way or carcasses makes more sense. I think and probably walking being a little more parcelized, a higher challenge. So I think that's a great point, and maybe that could be a suggested revision to decrease that from 1 mile down to what Mia recommended of maybe 1,000 feet.
Yeah, and just, you know, if would this put somebody out of compliance if a neighboring parcel within that zone says, you know, you notice there's something there, you see the raptors flying around, but they're like, well, don't go on my property, I don't care. So I don't know if there's something that's specific, you know, to monitor whatever that radius is on their parcel that they have control of.
I mean, if we stick with the 1,000 feet, that already includes what we've required as the setback from the parcel line. So that would ensure that would be within a single property ownership. So that would be consistent with what we have the ability to enforce and require.
You know, or is there, you know, have these other requirements of, oh, sorry. The other requirements of having the environmental assessment before construction. I wonder if that would result in recommendations specific to the project. So do you have to have this additional requirement from the county if during the environmental, feasibility phase, maybe that comes out as a recommendation. Or I don't know if we could lighten this to say the county, I don't know, may require, or based on the results of the pre-construction environmental review, this might be a requirement.
Commissioner Desmani.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was gonna ask about that as well, but I'm really glad where you've ended up here with 1,000 feet, and maybe if we're not gonna be approving this today anyway, maybe the people can come back, Chris, me, others can come back with a revised recommendation if 1,000 feet is not exactly the right number. But 1,000 feet makes sense to me. But I also wanted to raise the issue regarding the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. There's a little bit of a catch-22 that occurs with involving Department of Fish and Wildlife. Meaning they don't look at a project unless it's developed to a certain point. And yet the developer, the best thing that a wind developer can do is to clear these issues out of the way. I mean, I had the opportunity to investigate and talk to Western Washington developers of wind projects, got things built. And most of my most notable memories are from the Grace Harbor Coastal Community Wind Project. And but more than one project seemed to be repeating the same message, that talk to Fish and Wildlife and Audubon as well. That was the other thing that came up. Talk to them as soon as possible, because the more quickly you engage them, the more quickly you can kind of optimize or revise your design, even where you put your wind monitoring and all that, to be more likely for the project to be successful. And I hope I'm getting my point across. It's just, I'm wondering if you have thought about that and how to really encourage this kind of assessment on birds upfront in the permitting process.
It's okay, I'll tackle that question before we go to Commissioner Hanson. So yeah, we kind of breeze through some of the previous letters here. So, I mean, Cliff, if you can go back to letter C. So if you see in that, this is again a recommendation from Wildlife Committee member Greg Green. So he's essentially recommending that we form a technical advisory committee, which includes representatives from the county's Planning and Development Services, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the landowner, the applicant, and the tribes, and the local citizen groups with that local knowledge of avian use and species, to help consider what potential problems and what mitigation issues could occur both during construction and for the life of the project. So this was, I think, what Greg was recommending, that kind of convening this group before the permit gets submitted or after it gets submitted and before we move to construction, to try to tackle a lot of those issues you're describing here. So even to Mia's point about the carcass recommendation, hopefully a lot of these issues are going to be identified with this technical advisory committee as this goes through the permitting process. So we did try to accommodate what you're stating is a potential solution to address some of that state and federal review.
Thank you.
Eddie, Yuri, would you unmute? And before you speak, I'd like to ask you a question. We are all familiar with hearing you address different bodies, and what I'd like to for tonight, just as when we call on a commissioner, we say Commissioner Desmani, I would like to refer to you as committee member Yuri, so anyone that listens to the audio tape will know that you're not addressing us as just a citizen with a question, but you're speaking as a committee member. Are you okay with that?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Okay, so committee member Yuri, go ahead.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
That was just my question. If you were okay that if I addressed you that way, so that the public listening to this tape in the future will understand that you're a committee member.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess while we're on this, this part of the draft amendments, we can all recognize that these requirements in code are going to place a burden on the project applicant, the developer, be it a utility or whatever entity. And I think the language, I think that is actually something that we might want to revisit, whether it's actually practical to comply with or reasonable to have to comply with. Say if like a deer dies somewhere within a mile of the project, should the burden be, should the burden fall on the wind facility operator like that? That's I think that might be questionable. I don't know. I think this part somehow ended up in our final draft proposal, but in general, appointing a technical advisory committee, it would be prudent. This is in line with what other jurisdictions are doing with existing facilities in Washington. And after, if we do see wind energy development of significant scale, I think a lot of the concerns and problems specific to this particular area will become better addressed and better understood after we go through the first project. But yeah, for the first one who wants to develop here, it's going to create some uncertainty around how it's going to go. I could speak a little if folks are want to dive in more. We could talk a little bit more about the specific species of concern around here, like bald eagles, or mitigations that will occur. I should also just note that notwithstanding what we put here in the Whatcom County Code, in the SEPA process, and also all the more like in a conditional use permit process, subject to some discretion by the county, if it's in a forestry zone. There can be other protective conditions put in place that would mitigations and as well as general like studies and quantification and measures taken to avoid placing these within migratory routes or directly with too close to habitats or nesting areas and all of that. If there was going to be development up in federally owned forest land or DNR owned land up closer to Mount Baker, that's where we might run into more risk with the marbled murrelet or other endangered species. But in like the foothills regions or the coastal regions, we haven't determined that the risk to avian species is going to be significant. That's something that can be better identified through the process, though. That will happen when a project of scale is proposed.
Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
You're dovetailing just coincidentally on what committee member Uri indicated about number 3 about identify and remove. I don't have a problem with making requirements on applicants, but I have a problem with making impossible requirements on applicants, seeing as they wouldn't have the jurisdiction to go on anybody's property. Well, they wouldn't have the capacity probably to be constantly monitoring for dead things. And if they found them, they wouldn't have the jurisdiction to go on anybody's property to remove them. And I just don't think that's a reasonable clause. And I would support removing it entirely. And back up on consultation or on the technical advisory committee, it's almost like a fig leaf throwing that out there, because particularly in terms of tribal involvement, because the tribes have this constant barrage of unfunded mandates thrown at them. We want you to do this, we want you to do that, we want you to be on this committee, and no one says we're going to give you money to do that. So I think that's unreasonable to expect the tribes to be involved in a TAC. One tribe might choose to do so, but I think it's unfair to predicate this on the fact that they would be involved. Yet I would like to see formal consultation with the tribes, particularly since there might be cultural or archaeological assets. Now, I haven't read that all the way through. It might come later. If it comes later, that's great. But there should be formal consultation with the tribes on both environmental and cultural issues for these projects.
Commissioner Lund, go ahead.
I appreciate Commissioner Hansen's comments just now. My one other suggestion about this C, because it's, I certainly see where the vetted knowledge from planning and development, fish and wildlife, the tribes, citizen groups, which I'm assuming are NGOs, not just neighborhood associations, but maybe, I don't know what that means. But we do have landowners in there. And so I'm just wondering, what are the qualifications for a landowner when we're saying shall be invited to this TAC? So that to me seems the least defined. How do we know if that landowner has specific knowledge of avian species? That just, and when we have a shall, where do these landowners come from? Is it a certain radius? It just, I have a lot of wonders about that particular group being part of the TAC. It seems a little undefined to me right now.
Have you guys met the owner of the property that the project is on, or all the surrounding landowners?
Well, I think part of why this, maybe to tackle Commissioner Hansen's question first, Cliff has highlighted on the screen, shall be invited to participate. So I think with, as far as tribal involvement, wanted to invite them to participate in this review process, but not mandate their involvement. So I think this just felt like a good opportunity to make sure we provided that door open early in the process to allow for the tribes to engage the process, but not mandate that. For the landowner question, part of this, if you see in the first sentence there, that the applicant shall form a technical advisory committee. So we designed that in a way that provided that the jurisdictions attend, the County Planning and Development Services, the State Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that landowner's piece, ideally, as kind of Cliff said, if the applicant is different than the landowner where the project will be developed, or if they have developed a relationship with adjacent landowners, that's their opportunity to try to recruit landowners that they would like to have be involved during that process. It's not just an open call to any landowner that wants to participate, and we try to put that burden on the applicant to ensure that they have at least invited a local or regional landowner to participate in the project.
So language to the effect of the project landowners then might provide more specificity here.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that modification.
Commissioner Masseri.
Oh, just to clarify what when reading it and what I'm hearing you say, that this is for the applicant to form this committee. And if they thought it was to the benefit for them to invite local landowners, they could, but they're not required to invite every neighbor around them to come make a comment, right? They would be kind of picking what landowners they're inviting. So it's just kind of throwing that out as a suggestion.
For the technical advisory committee, that is giving the applicant a certain degree of willpower. My understanding of development actions that PDS approves and reviews, there is another notification process that goes out to all adjacent landowners.
Sure, like with any permitting process, but this specifically is for the applicant to recruit this group, right?
Right.
Commissioner Dasmani.
So I want to ask Cliff about this particular section. If it's possible for you to advise the committee in terms of practical issues around this section, and obviously with all of your experience of planning and development services, maybe you can help them fine tune it a little bit in terms of what's doable and more practical in terms of, and I think that's a big part of what the questions that are coming from the commission are about. So anyway, I don't know if that's something you've already weighed in on, or if it's something you can take a another review of this particular section and provide input on.
Yeah, I think we should get together and talk about this. It'll have to be this week. When's the next packet due? Next Tuesday? So it has to be tomorrow.
Luckily, Cliff, you have nothing on your calendar until then.
Yeah, I got two things going to council. I gotta get ready tomorrow, so. But can we talk at least on the phone or Zoom tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm happy to chat. And I think you're hitting on something good, Commissioner Deshmani. I mean, ultimately, there was concern around this wildlife item. So I think, what you're seeing as a response to the subcommittee and ultimately the full Climate Impact Advisory Committee wanting to make sure that we alleviate concerns around wildlife. So if we overcorrected or went too far, which I think is kind of the nature of what I'm hearing, I appreciate that. And we'll see what we can do to try to maybe tighten it up a little bit so we don't inadvertently create an additional undue burden on these.
Yeah, and to kind of follow up, we all want to protect wildlife. I mean, and there's no question about that. And it's just a question of figuring out what will actually work, what will actually be effective, and maybe putting as kind of unfunded mandates will make it less likely to be effective in protecting wildlife. So.
Okay, Commissioner Hanson.
Well, everybody who's been in this committee knows that I'm not soft on developments, right? But I think that this 0.752C clause is unnecessary and cumbersome and redundant. The kinds of things that we are looking for there will be covered in the SEPA process. All these Fish and Wildlife, all these people they're talking about, they're the nations, they'll all be included in the SEPA process, and they'll have people who are professionally qualified to make these determinations. So I think this, again, is just another fig leaf being thrown to assure people that it's not going to kill all the animals, but it's not going to make any difference whether there's a redundant committee to process these that are already in place. And it seems cumbersome and unnecessary to me. And it got down to it, I would move that we strike that section C.
Commissioner Deshmani.
Sorry, Commissioner Hanson, part of the thinking why this is here, certainly why for me, I think it's important to have something like this here, is to catch early and upfront challenges that would show up in the SEPA process. And remember, I mean, Western Washington is not going to see, $100 million or $1 billion type of projects that happen in Eastern Washington. They're going to be small. So the permitting budget, the planning budget for these projects is small. And so there's not a lot of opportunity to discover things after you've hired a team to get your project permitted. So the thinking is to maximize the discovery upfront so that when you get to the point of getting the final permits, there's no surprises.
Committee member Yuri, go ahead.
So this is a section that, seems totally fair to tweak or make some revisions to. Proposal to strike, also worth considering. As Commissioner Deshmani noted, whether or not it's a mandate or a recommendation in the process, this could be for the benefit of the applicant significantly, right? And that, having stakeholders with local expertise and attention on the ground here, rather than just folks at state agencies overseeing, can exactly just help to work through any issues that might arise through the site-specific impacts. As Commissioner Lund inquired about, like, what are some of these general terms referring to when we're thinking local citizen groups? Par for the course would be to invite the local Audubon Society chapter, folks that are certainly, would be attentive to, and I expect that we'll hear from at the public hearings upcoming in this process. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's all up to you, and I think you all have good judgment here as a commission to determine what seems best. And yeah, so if it would be, I don't think that Climate Impact Advisory Committee is going to object to softening of language here. And yeah, we want to avoid redundancy, but yeah, there could definitely be some benefits as far as avoiding, helping the applicant to avoid violating the Endangered Species Act, right, by having local people here on the ground advising them through the process.
I think Chris and I can come up with something reasonable.
Commissioner Lund, go ahead.
One suggestion might be to take the data that's acquired in section B that we're requesting about avian use and across the seasons, and taking that data to the technical advisory committee. Hearing Commissioner Dasmani explain the intent of section C, it seems like maybe a hybrid approach between B and C. And this group might be able to look at the data and advise based on that data set. And the one other piece is that we say that it could go on and for the life of the project, the technical advisory committee, until they decide that they're ready to disband, and that could be problematic as well. Is that a majority vote? Is that, how would that process work? And so perhaps it's just an upfront and early assessment based on data. I'm not saying that's the right suggestion. I'm just saying that could be a possible approach to consider.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Somewhat repetitive of what's been said is whether this is overzealous or repetitive, and that it is covered by SEPA. I think it's important to keep all, if not most of that wording in section C. Again, like it was said earlier, it protects the owner, but it also protects from further issues or challenges created by any of those stakeholders who were not specifically included in name. And sometimes whether or not you're included or not, if you're not included in name, that itself is a challenge. And I don't want to be too specific, but I think that it's important and relevant to have that section there. Thank you.
As I said, Chris and I will work on this tomorrow and have something for you at the next meeting.
I just want to say I'd rather get this right than bring you something rushed. So I guess I'd let the commission, and there's this and other things that staff should go back and work on, that we skip the next meeting and bring it to you the following meeting, which is a month out. That gives us enough time to put together something that's a little more solid. So that would be my preference. I'd rather not try to put this together again.
I think that's a really good idea to postpone it a meeting. So we do have a month, or you have a month to bring it to us.
We have a couple of weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Which just gives us enough time to really, do a better job, and I think that benefits you guys.
Okay, so this was already, like I said, these are the sections that were moved up. And then let's see, oh, you guys had some changes to the abandonment insurance decommissioning.
Yeah, I'll try to tackle this briefly and might defer to you to catch up. So just the change of the director or designee, I believe that intention was just.
That's mine, yeah.
Yeah,
That's standard stuff I'm doing in all code amendments these days.
So remove the time that begins close minutes. Right?
Yeah, so this is you guys is here.
And I think the main intent with this was to again kind of clarify the difference between a small wind energy system decommissioning requirements and the large regular wind energy system requirements, and ensure that that if in fact energy system is decommissioned, just clarifies what must be removed. So it just kind of simplifies that. And for the large one, again, given that the wind energy systems, the large ones are a much more significant impact on the ground, also require some degree of below ground removal as well. And I believe this is largely just bringing this requirement up to consistent standards with what the national standards are.
Yeah, and just recognizing, small wind energy systems are usually installed on a, individual's own property. So if they want to remove things underground, they can, but they're not required. Versus a large wind energy system, it's usually on leased property. And so the requirement to, basically remove everything down to 36 inches underground so that, if it's on a farm, the farmer could still farm and not have to worry about underground cables or foundations. Unless the property owner says, hey, it's okay. Sometimes part of these projects includes an access road that's built. And the property owner might say, hey, I want to keep that road.
Change the insurance. And I think the biggest change is adding for West here so that it no longer applies to SWES.
That is correct. Almost to me is similar point. Small wind energy systems are typically built on smaller private property. So that property owner takes out their own insurance for what impacts their own property. And the recognition that, as Mia just said, a lot of these larger wind energy systems are typically constructed on leased land. So just wanted to clarify that that requirement still stands for the larger wind energy systems.
Let's all just edits, nothing changes there. Changes there, nothing there. And then the definitions, as I said, moving them out of that chapter and putting them into 2097. So some of them were already in there, but we're amending them to the committee's recommendation. Now, the rest of this, everything else has to do with moving those definitions, because throughout the code, it refers to a word by its specific number. And if I'm getting rid of all the numbers, I'm just referring to chapter 2097. So it's just kind of housekeeping stuff. So we've gone over the proposed West stuff. The rest is, like I said, housekeeping.
We are supposed to have a public hearing tonight. We'll go through workshop after that, which sometimes we ask a lot of questions. So, Candy, if you go ahead, public hearing, and I will open the public hearing. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess the first question is, do we have anyone from the public who would be interested in providing public comment for the public hearing? So anyone in person, or if you are online, you can press the hand icon or *9. No one new has arrived, so raise your hand or let me know if you would like to provide public comment on this information.
I am not seeing any hands. I'm not going to adjourn the public hearing because we're going to pick it up again. We'll continue this public hearing at our next meeting on this topic. So for now, the meeting is adjourned, not the planning commission hearing, but the public hearing is adjourned right now. Okay, so commissioners, questions? I do have a question, so I'll ask this one. Being down right along Birch Bay where we have a plethora of waterfowl and other fowl, very thick. Hundreds of them fly over my property every day. How does this proposal handle those types of issues?
Well, I mean, that is where you saw a lot of that kind of improved wildlife code. So again, the avian monitoring for a year prior to construction, and then that was where some of the intent of that technical advisory committee came from with that local avian experts on point. So the whole intent of this recognition is that, you know, birds and bats are the biggest concern for these projects. So we tried to insert language based on our discussion with the wildlife advisory committee to try to tackle that. I think from the birds you see, you know, none of the allowable zones, ag, forestry, et cetera, are located around Birch Bay or some of those avian hotspots. I mean, I think Cherry Point is likely the area that might potentially have to consider that more. I mean, the annual avian review is going to indicate whether or not that is or is not a high concern for those projects. But I think the code that we propose, and hopefully the code that we'll revise and repropose, will try to do our best to accommodate that concern.
Still address it, but get rid of some of the more heinous things.
I could see the Cherry Point and then wondered if it was just the Cherry Point industrial area or if it's that as a geographic area. And if it's not just the industrial area, then how far, what would be the definition of Cherry Point?
Well, so the zones allowed for the large wind energy systems are currently restricted in this proposal to high impact, heavy impact industrial, light impact industrial, agriculture, rural forestry, and commercial forestry. So it's not proposed to permit it in any rural or rural residential zones.
So that in Cherry Point, that's almost all heavy impact. There's some a little light, but yeah. It basically the zone is that area.
Commissioners, are there any other questions? Yes. If there are no other questions, is there any unfinished business? Everybody, any reason why we shouldn't adjourn? Is adjournment fine? All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I thought we had more to do. Go for it. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.
Better go now.
Better
be prepared, man.
I love your twisting.
That's why everybody's like, no, we're good. We're good. Yeah, I tell you, I live in the Fraser River outfit. Now's when you want to, at the last 3 days. That wind just all night long. It just makes the house.
At my place, I'm up on